New York City was alive with the hum of activity, its streets buzzing with energy and anticipation as the annual gala for the city's elite took place. The grand ballroom was lit with glittering chandeliers, reflecting the wealth and opulence of the guests. The event was a celebration of charity, but for the guests' business moguls, celebrities, and politicians it was more about power, prestige, and connections. And Ethan Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, was at the center of it all. At 35, Ethan was at the pinnacle of his career. Tall, with sharp features and an undeniable presence, he had built his empire from the ground up. His name was known in every boardroom, his decisions made headlines. But as he walked through the crowded ballroom, his face impassive, his thoughts were far from the celebrations around him. He was here for business, not for pleasure. Ethan had always been a man driven by ambition, more interested in the numbers, the deals, and the future of his company than in personal connections. But there was one person who had broken through that cold exterior, person he had once cherished, but had pushed aside for the sake of his career. Ethan's mind wandered to their first meeting. She had been different from anyone he had ever known, independent, confident, and utterly uninterested in his wealth. Clara had worked as an artist, designing pieces for luxury brands, and it was her refreshing perspective on life that had first drawn Ethan in. But as their relationship deepened, Ethan found himself torn between his love for her and his overwhelming drive to build his empire at first. Clara had been patient with Ethan. She understood his ambition, admired it even, but as time went on, she started to feel neglected. Ethan would cancel plans, forget special dates, and prioritize meetings over time with her. He promised her that things would change, but they never did. Work always came first. Their last argument was the breaking point. "I can't keep doing this, Ethan," Clara had said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I love you, but you're never here. You're always working, always busy. I need more than this. I need someone who can be there for me, not just someone who promises to change but never does." Ethan had been stunned, unable to find the words to make her understand. He had always believed that if he built a successful future, he could offer her everything: security, luxury, stability. But he had failed to see that Clara didn't want a mansion or a diamond ring. She wanted his time, his attention, his heart. "I'm sorry," he had said, but the apology had fallen on deaf ears. She had already made up her mind. The next day, Clara packed up her things and left. Ethan hadn't even had the chance to apologize properly. He had tried calling, sending messages, but she never responded. The silence was suffocating. Now, at the gala, standing amongst the most influential people in the world, Ethan realized that none of it mattered. All the money, the power, the success, it all felt hollow without Clara by his side. The loneliness was overwhelming. As the evening wore on, Ethan excused himself from the crowd. He walked out into the cool night air, the sounds of laughter and chatter fading behind him. His mind was clouded, a mixture of regret, guilt, and frustration swirling inside him. He had everything he could ever want, yet it meant nothing. He had built his empire, but he had lost the one person who had made him feel truly alive. He had traded her love for success, and now he had nothing to show for it. As he walked down the empty streets of the city, he realized that his entire life had been built on a false foundation. He had spent so much time chasing success that he had forgotten the one thing that truly mattered: love. The thought of Clara brought a sharp pain to his chest. He missed her more than he had ever imagined possible. But he knew, deep down, that he couldn't just expect her to come back to him. He had taken her for granted, and now she was gone. Ethan found himself standing outside a small art gallery. The lights inside flickered softly, and he could just make out the shape of a woman walking past the window. Something about her reminded him of Clara, the same elegance, the same quiet strength. He stepped closer, peering through the glass. And there she was, Clara. She was standing at the counter, chatting with the gallery owner, laughing softly. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face her. After everything that had happened, was it possible to make things right? He opened the door slowly, the bell ringing above him. Clara turned, and their eyes locked. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, Clara's expression shifted. It wasn't anger, but it wasn't warmth either. She looked at him with a kind of resignation, as if she had already moved on, but still held a sliver of something for him. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" I didn't expect to see you," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. "But I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us. I've made mistakes, Clara. I've taken you for granted, and I'm sorry." Clara didn't respond right away. She simply studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether it was worth engaging in this conversation at all. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Ethan," she finally said. "But you did. And I couldn't keep waiting for you to choose me. I had to choose myself." Ethan's heart sank. The truth in her words was undeniable. "I understand," he whispered. Clara gave him a small, sad smile. "I'm glad you understand. But you can't just undo the past. You can't change what's been done." "I know," Ethan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. I want to be better, not for you, but for myself. I want to be someone who isn't consumed by work, someone who knows what truly matters." Clara looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I hope you do, Ethan. I really do." And with that, she turned and walked out of the gallery, leaving Ethan standing there, staring at the empty doorway. After that night at the art gallery, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Clara. He spent days in his office, staring at the unfinished projects, the piles of paperwork that had once consumed him, but now seemed insignificant. His mind was focused solely on the brief moment he had shared with Clara. She had been calm, composed, and yet there was a sadness in her eyes that he could not shake. He thought about how she had moved on, how she had built a life for herself without him. And he knew deep down that it wasn't just the physical distance between them that had grown. It was the emotional distance, the chasm he had created by constantly putting his work before her. The next morning, Jack received a call from his father, William Blackwood, who was known for his cold, business-minded demeanor. Their relationship had always been built on duty and expectation. William had been the one to push Ethan to succeed, and Ethan had always tried to prove himself worthy of his father's approval. "Ethan, I need to talk to you," his father's voice came through the phone. Sharp and direct, Ethan sighed, already knowing where this was going. "I'm listening." "You've been neglecting your responsibilities," William continued. "The company's future depends on you, and you've been slacking. This isn't the time for distractions, Ethan." Ethan clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling up inside him. "I know, Dad, I'm not slacking. I'm just thinking about things differently now. Thinking differently." His father scoffed. "Your job is to lead the company, not sit around and think. This is the legacy I've built, and you will continue it. There is no room for personal nonsense. We don't have time for that. Ethan took a deep breath. I'm not abandoning the company, Dad, but I've realized that I can't just be a puppet for the business anymore. I need to live my life, and I need to find balance. William's silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than ever. I don't care about your balance, Ethan. You are my legacy. And if you don't prove that you can handle the pressure, I will take a step back. You'll lose everything. The phone call ended, and Ethan was left alone with his thoughts. His father's words cut deep, but they also confirmed something he already knew. For years, he had been sacrificing his own happiness for the sake of legacy, his father's legacy, not his own. And now he was at a crossroads. The choice was his: continue to live up to the expectations of others, or finally take control of his own future. The next few days were a blur of business meetings and family obligations, but Ethan could not shake the feeling of emptiness. Despite his efforts to focus on work, his mind kept drifting back to Clara. One evening, he found himself walking down the street near her apartment. He didn't plan it. It was just something that felt right. His footsteps led him to a small park where they had once walked together hand in hand, lost in conversation as he sat down on the same bench they had shared months ago. He saw a familiar figure in the distance. Clara. She was sitting on the grass, sketching in her notebook, her focus intense but peaceful. Ethan's heart tightened in his chest. For a moment, he debated approaching her, but he knew he had to be careful. He couldn't just barge into her life again as if nothing had happened. Clara had made it clear that she had moved on, but he had to try. He had to make things right. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to her, his footsteps soft on the grass. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. She looked up, and for a second her eyes softened, but then they hardened just a little. She set her sketchbook aside and stood up. "Ethan," she said, her voice polite but distant, "what are you doing here?" I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I know I've hurt you. I know I made mistakes," he said, his words coming out quickly. "But I'm not the same person I was. I've changed, Clara. I want to make things right." Clara studied him for a moment, her gaze unreadable. "I don't know if things can be made right, Ethan. You made your choices. I had to make mine too." Ethan's heart sank, but he pressed on. "I understand, but I can't live with the regret anymore. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to try. I need to prove that I've learned, that I've grown." Clara took a step back, her expression softening slightly, but still cautious. "I've moved on, Ethan. I've learned to live without you, and I'm okay with that. But I'm not sure if I can trust you again. I'm not sure if I want to." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "I don't want you to trust me just because of what I say. I want to show you. I want to prove to you that I'm capable of giving you what you need, the love and attention that you deserve." There was a long pause before Clara finally spoke. "Ethan, I don't know what you expect from me. I don't know if I'm ready to go back to that place, to that time, but ... I'm not saying it's impossible." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "Then can we at least try? I don't want to give up on us. Not without a fight." Clara's gaze softened. "We'll see," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made every effort to prove to Clara that he was ready to change. He slowed down his pace at work, took more time for himself, and started prioritizing the things that truly mattered. He would call Clara, not to ask for another chance, but to check in on her, to ask about her day, to remind her that he was there for her, not just as a man who wanted something, but as someone who genuinely cared. Clara was still cautious, but Ethan could see the walls around her slowly starting to come down. She began to let him into her life again, not fully, but in small ways. They met for coffee, went to the park, and even shared a quiet dinner together. The connection they once had began to resurface, slowly but surely. The days following their conversation in the park were filled with mixed emotions for both Ethan and Clara. Ethan had made a commitment to change, but Clara remained cautious. She wasn't ready to open up completely, not after everything that had happened. Still, there was a spark of hope in Ethan's heart, hope that he could rebuild the trust he had broken. One small step at a time, Clara had agreed to meet him again, but the stakes were high. She had to be sure that this wasn't just another fleeting attempt to fix what could never be fixed. She had spent so much time trying to heal after their breakup that she wasn't willing to risk falling back into the same pattern of disappointment. Their first meeting after their conversation at the gallery was at a quiet cafe, a neutral place. Ethan arrived early, his heart racing with anticipation. He wanted to get it right this time. He didn't know what would come of it, but he was determined to make it clear that he wasn't the same man who had pushed her away before. When Clara arrived, she looked as beautiful and composed as ever. She gave him a polite smile but kept her distance, both physically and emotionally. Ethan didn't take it personally. He knew that it was going to take time. "Hi," Clara said, sitting down opposite him. "Thanks for asking me to meet. I wasn't sure if I should, but I guess it's good to talk." Ethan smiled softly, his nerves getting the best of him. "I'm glad you came. I promise I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want to be honest with you." Clara nodded, her gaze softening slightly. "I'm listening." As the conversation flowed, Ethan was careful with his words. He didn't want to overwhelm Clara, but he wanted to show her how much he had changed. He shared his thoughts on how his perspective had shifted, how he had realized that he had been so consumed by work and expectations that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. "I spent so much time building something that wasn't even mine," Ethan confessed, his voice filled with regret. "I've always tried to live up to my father's expectations, to make him proud. But what's the point if I lose the one thing that could make me truly happy?" "I wasn't living for myself, Clara. I was living for everyone else." Clara listened quietly, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but she wasn't sure if she could fully trust it. She had heard promises before, only to be let down. "Ethan," Clara said after a long pause, "I believe that you're trying, I really do. But I'm scared. You hurt me, and I don't know if I can just forget that. I need time. I need to see that this is real, that you've really changed." Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I get it, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm just asking for the chance to show you that I can be the man you deserve. I won't stop trying, Clara. I won't make the same mistake again." Clara looked down, her fingers tapping gently on the cup. She had moved on in many ways, built a life for herself without him. But a small part of her a small part still wondered what it would be like if they tried again. But the fear of getting hurt once more held her back. The days that followed were a mixture of progress and setbacks. Ethan made every effort to keep his promises. He didn't cancel their meetings, didn't choose work over their time together. And slowly, Clara began to let him back into her life, just a little. They had coffee, they went for walks, and their conversations were warmer, more genuine. But there was still that lingering doubt in Clara's mind. She was scared. What if this was just another phase, another attempt that would end in disappointment? She had already given Ethan so many chances, and she couldn't afford to lose herself in the process again. One evening, Ethan invited Clara to dinner at a small restaurant, one of the places they used to visit when they were together. It was a simple gesture, but for Clara, it meant a lot. She hesitated before agreeing, but deep down, she knew that it was something she had to do, something they both needed. The night was quiet, the candlelight flickering between them as they talked about everything and nothing. The conversation was easy, natural, as if no time had passed since their last dinner together. For the first time in a while, Clara allowed herself to relax, to enjoy the moment. But just as the evening was coming to a close, a familiar topic came upward. Ethan, eager to share his progress on a new project, began talking about his latest deal. It was something he had worked on for months, and he was excited to see it come to fruition. But for Clara, it was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong before. She could feel the familiar pang of jealousy and frustration creeping back, even when Ethan promised that things would be different. He was still the same man, consumed by his work, willing to sacrifice their time together for another deal. I thought we were going to talk about something other than work tonight, Clara said, her voice tight, the smile fading from her face. Ethan's eyes widened, surprised by her tone. Clara, I didn't mean to know, she interrupted, her voice firm. You don't get it, Ethan. I can't be in a relationship where work always comes first. You don't get to fix everything with one dinner or a few kind words. You have to show me, over time, that I matter. Ethan sat back, the weight of her words settling in. He wanted to say something, anything that could reassure her, but all he could do was nod. He knew she was right. He had a long way to go, and even though he had changed in many ways, the battle wasn't over. The rest of the evening passed in silence, and when they parted ways, Clara felt conflicted. Ethan had been trying, but it still felt like there was something missing, something that she wasn't sure could be fixed. Ethan, on the other hand, was crushed. He understood why Clara was upset, but he couldn't help but feel like he was walking on thin ice. The promises he had made to himself were harder to keep than he had imagined, but he wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. That night, Ethan returned to his penthouse, the silence of the empty space suffocating him. He had everything: a thriving business, wealth beyond measure, but all he wanted was Clara by his side. He had chosen success over love for so long, but now he had to prove to himself that he could make the right choice. The following weeks were filled with moments of hope and setbacks. Ethan tried his best to show Clara that he was serious about changing. He attended fewer meetings, took time off work, and focused on the things that mattered most: his relationship with Clara. But the cracks in their bond were hard to ignore. Ethan knew that. Actions spoke louder than words, and he made a conscious effort to change his routine. He would meet Clara for breakfast, spend evenings walking in the park, and slowly rebuild the intimacy they had once shared. Yet, despite his best efforts, Clara remained distant. Each time they met, there was a slight hesitation in her demeanor. She would smile, laugh, and enjoy the moments, but there was always a layer of uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan could sense it. The walls she had built around her heart were high and thick, and no matter how much he tried to climb them, they remained impenetrable. He wanted so desperately to show her that he had changed, that he could offer her the love she had always deserved. But every time she pulled away, it felt like he was losing her all over again. One evening, as they sat in a cozy restaurant, the conversation turned to the past. They had avoided discussing the reasons for their breakup for a while, but Ethan felt that the only way to move forward was to address the elephant in the room. He had to confront the mistakes he had made, no matter how painful it was. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice quiet but steady. "I know we've talked about this before, but I can't keep pretending that I haven't hurt you. I was selfish. I didn't see how much you needed me, and I took you for granted. You were always there for me, but I wasn't there for you." Clara looked at him, her eyes softening for a moment. "Ethan, you're right. You weren't there when I needed you most. And I spent so much time hoping you would change, but I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for you to figure it out. I had to let go." Ethan's chest tightened as he heard the words he had feared. He had known this truth deep down, but hearing Clara say it aloud made it all the more real. He had lost her, and now he had to live with the consequences of his choices. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I wish I could go back and make it right, but I can't. All I can do now is show you that I'm not the same man I was before." Clara looked down at her hands, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her wine glass. "Ethan, I want to believe you. I really do. But I can't just forget everything that happened. I can't ignore the fact that you chose your work over me for so long. I gave you everything I had, and you never gave me the same in return." The words stung, but Ethan knew they were true. He had always prioritized his career, thinking that if he achieved enough, everything else would fall into place. But now he realized how wrong he had been. "I know I can't take back what I did," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I need you to know that I've learned. I can't promise I won't make mistakes again, but I can promise that I'll always choose you now. You're the most important thing in my life, Clara, and I'll fight for you, no matter what." Clara didn't respond immediately. She sat there, her expression unreadable. Ethan held his breath, hoping that her silence wasn't a sign that she had already made up her mind. But as the minutes passed, he realized that some things couldn't be fixed in a single conversation. Trust wasn't something that could be restored overnight. Over the next few days, Clara kept her distance. Ethan didn't know how to navigate this new territory. He had made mistakes, yes, but he was willing to put in the effort to fix them. He had to prove to Clara that he could be the man she deserved. But Clara wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up again. She had worked so hard to move on from their past. She had learned to live without him, to find happiness on her own. And now, despite the changes Ethan had made, she couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? One afternoon, Clara called Ethan and asked him to meet her. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of something unspoken. Ethan's heart raced as he drove to the cafe they had chosen. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this conversation could be the turning point in their relationship. When they sat down, Clara's expression was serious, but her eyes held a certain softness. She had clearly been thinking about this for a while. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady, "I've been thinking about us a lot. And I've realized something important. I don't know if I can go back to what we had. I don't know if I can trust you the way I once did." Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped that Clara would give him another chance, but he had always known that this was a possibility. I understand, Ethan said quietly. But Clara, please know that I'm not asking you to forget. I'm not asking you to erase the past. I'm asking you to give me the chance to show you that I can be different. I can't change what happened, but I want to build a future with you, if you'll let me. Clara looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. I can't promise that I'll ever feel the same way I once did, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild what we lost. But it won't be easy, Ethan, and it won't happen overnight. Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a promise of a fairy tale ending, but it was something. They were taking the first step together, and that was all he could ask for in the days that followed. Ethan and Clara began to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and frustration, but they both knew that they had to be patient with each other. The trust they had lost could only be regained through consistent effort, not promises. Ethan continued to prove to Clara that he was willing to make her a priority, no matter the cost. He spent more time with her, focused less on his work, and learned how to listen not just to her words, but to her heart, and Clara, though hesitant, began to let her guard down. She could see the sincerity in Ethan's actions, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Maybe this time, things could be different. It had been a few weeks since Ethan and Clara had made the decision to try again. Each day felt like a small victory for Ethan, as he was finally able to prove that he could be there for Clara in a way that he had never been before. He called her more often, made time for her, and took genuine interest in her life outside of his own world. He had become the man he promised to be, but Clara was still hesitant. Clara could feel the difference in Ethan's actions. His sincerity was undeniable, and for the first time in their relationship, it wasn't about the power, the wealth, or the success. It was about them. But despite his efforts, Clara couldn't completely let go of the past. She had been hurt too many times, and her heart had learned to guard itself. Even against Ethan. One afternoon, Clara invited Ethan to her studio. It had been months since they had spent time in a quiet, personal space like this. Her studio was filled with art, colors, and the calming sounds of soft music. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could be herself, something she had to carve out for herself after so many years of feeling lost in her relationship with Ethan. Ethan walked in, immediately feeling the peaceful energy of the room. The walls were lined with canvases, some finished, others still in progress. The place felt like Clara's heart laid bare, her creativity, her thoughts, her emotions all on display. "Your space is beautiful," Ethan said. Glancing around with awe, Clara smiled, but there was still a slight distance in her eyes. "Thanks. It's where I come to think, to create." "To escape," Ethan nodded, stepping closer to her. "I understand. I used to escape into my work, but now I know that's not enough. I've learned that it's not just about the hustle. It's about the people you choose to live your life with." Clara's gaze softened for a moment, but her voice remained steady. "I'm glad you've learned that. But it's still hard, Ethan. You can't just undo the past. I need time." Ethan felt the sting of her words, but he wasn't going to give up. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking for a chance to prove myself. I'll wait as long as it takes, Clara. I'm here for the long haul." Clara studied him carefully. She had been guarded for so long, But there was something in his eyes now, a sincerity that hadn't been there before. I know you're trying, Ethan, and that means something to me. But don't expect me to fall back in love with you overnight. I need to see that this is real. Despite the progress they had made, the tension between them was still palpable. Clara's hesitations were not unfounded. She had built a life without him, learned to depend on herself, and the thought of giving up that independence was terrifying. Could she truly let Ethan back into her life? Could she trust him again, knowing what had happened? One evening, as they were walking through the park after a quiet dinner, Clara felt herself falling into the old familiar pattern of doubt. The way Ethan held her hand, the way he smiled at her. It all felt like they were slipping back into a routine they had once cherished. But the fear lingered. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. Clara, you've been distant lately. I know I can't rush you, but I need to know what you're feeling. I need to know where we stand. Clara pulled her hand away gently, her heart racing. I'm not sure I can do this, Ethan. I want to believe in us again, I do. But I can't forget what happened. I can't just pretend everything is fine. It's too soon. It's too hard. Ethan felt a pang of hurt, but he knew she was right. He had to be patient. The past couldn't be erased, but they could build something new. I don't expect you to forget. I just want to show you that I've changed, that I'm here for you, for us. Clara looked at him, her expression torn. I'm not sure if I'm ready to trust you with my heart again, Ethan. What if you choose work over me again? What if I'm just not enough? Ethan took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. You are more than enough, Clara. I can't promise that I won't slip up, but I promise I'll never make the same mistake. I'll never choose work over you again. But if you can't believe me, then I don't know what else to do. The words hung in the air between them. Clara looked at Ethan, seeing the depth of his pain and sincerity, but the walls around her heart were still too high. The following week, Clara received an unexpected visitor, Vera Hastings, an old friend from college. Vera had always been someone who believed in Clara's strength. Even when Clara herself didn't, she was a steady, grounded presence in Clara's life, and after their initial greetings, Vera sat down with her over coffee. You're doing well. I can see that, Vera said, studying Clara's face. But you're also struggling, aren't you? Clara sighed, looking down at her coffee cup. It's hard. Ethan's trying, but I don't know if I can trust him again. I don't know if I can open myself up to him after everything. Vera smiled knowingly. You can't let fear rule your decisions, Clara. You can't let the past define what your future could be. But you also have to ask yourself, are you willing to risk the chance of being hurt again, or are you willing to take a leap of faith? Clara's mind raced as Vera's words sank in. It wasn't just about trusting Ethan, it was about trusting herself and her own heart. She had spent so much time protecting herself, but was she willing to let that go? Could she give Ethan the chance he had asked for? A few days later, Clara met Ethan again. This time, they sat in the park, not far from where they had been before. The evening air was cool, and the soft rustling of the leaves reminded Clara of the peaceful times they had once shared. Ethan turned to her, his face serious yet hopeful. Clara, I know this hasn't been easy, but I need to know if there's a chance for us. I don't want to live with this regret, knowing that I never fought for you. Can we move forward, together? Clara looked at him, her heart beating in her chest. The moment felt monumental. She had spent so much time building walls around herself, but now She had to decide if she was willing to tear them down. "I don't know if I can trust you completely." "Ethan," Clara said softly, her voice trembling, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give us a chance." Ethan's face lit up, but he didn't rush her. He knew it was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. "Thank you, Clara. I won't let you down again," he promised. After their conversation in the park, Ethan and Clara found themselves in a delicate dance, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Ethan was more committed than ever to proving his sincerity, but Clara's heart remained guarded. The wounds of the past were not easily healed, and no matter how many promises Ethan made, Clara knew it would take more than words to rebuild the trust they had lost. Ethan was patient, though. He understood that trust wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. He spent every day showing Clara his commitment, not with grand gestures, but with consistent actions. He made sure she felt valued, respected, and most importantly loved, but Clara's doubts still lingered. Every time Ethan would open up, she would feel a small flicker of hope, but then the walls she had built to protect herself would quickly rise again. She knew she couldn't let her guard down too easily. She had to protect her heart, even if it meant keeping a safe distance from Ethan. One evening, things took a turn. Ethan had been busy with an important merger at work, and although he had promised Clara that they would spend the evening together, he ended up staying late at the office. He didn't call. He didn't text. Clara waited for him, but by 10 p.m., she started to feel the familiar wave of disappointment wash over her. She had been down this road before, waiting, hoping only to be let down again. She tried to keep herself occupied, working on her art, but every time she glanced at her phone, she felt a twinge of pain. This wasn't the life she wanted. She couldn't keep living like this, always second place to his career. By 11 p.m., Clara couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. She had decided she wasn't going to sit around waiting for Ethan anymore. If he didn't care enough to keep his promises, then maybe it was time for her to move on. Just as Clara was about to leave the apartment, her phone rang. It was Ethan. She stared at the screen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what this call was going to be. Another excuse, another apology, but she couldn't bear it anymore. She answered the phone, trying to keep the anger out of her voice. "Ethan," she said, her words clipped. "It's late. I've been waiting for you all night." "I know," Ethan's voice came through the line, full of regret. "I'm sorry, Clara. I've been caught up with the merger. I didn't mean to make you wait." "I was just what, Ethan?" Clara interrupted, the frustration building inside her. "This is what you always do. You put your work before everything else, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being put on the back burner. I'm not going to keep doing this." There was a long pause, and Clara could hear Ethan's breathing on the other end of the line. He didn't speak at first, and for a moment she thought he might hang up. But then he said the words she had been waiting to hear. "I don't want to lose you, Clara," he said quietly. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. I'm trying. I swear I'm trying to be better. But I don't want to lose you." Clara closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had changed. But the fear of getting hurt again was overwhelming. "I don't know, Ethan," she said softly. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I've tried, but I can't keep waiting for something that may never happen." Ethan's voice grew more urgent. "Please, Clara. I know I've made mistakes. but I'm ready to prove to you that I can be the man you deserve. I can't undo the past, but I'll do everything I can to make this right." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But the past was always there, lurking, reminding her of the promises he had broken. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough to keep putting her heart on the line. Clara stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. She could feel Ethan's words tugging at her heart, but the walls she had built were high, and she wasn't sure if she could tear them down again. "I need some time," Ethan, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think. I need time to figure out what I want. I don't want to keep going back and forth. I need to know that I'm not just a convenience for you, that I'm not just something you want when everything else isn't demanding your attention." Ethan's voice cracked as he spoke. "I understand. I won't push you. But I need you to know that I'm here and I'm not giving up on us. Please, just give me a chance to prove it." Clara closed her eyes, her heart heavy with indecision. She had wanted this moment, wanted Ethan to prove he was willing to fight for her. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure if it was enough. "I'm not sure if I can trust you again, Ethan. I don't know if I can put myself through this again," she said quietly. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I won't give up on you, Clara, and I won't give up on us. I know I've failed you, but I'm ready to change, if you're willing to give me the chance." Clara hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation settling over her. She had wanted closure, but all she had was more uncertainty. Ethan's words had made her feel hopeful, but she was still unsure if she could trust him again, for the first time in a long time. Clara didn't know what the future held. The pain of the past was still too fresh, and she wasn't sure if she could let go of the fear that had built up over the years. Ethan had promised to change, but Clara couldn't help but wonder if it was too late. The days following Clara's request for space were heavy for both of them. Ethan tried his best to respect her wishes, but the distance between them seemed to grow wider with each passing day. Despite his efforts to show her that he was ready to change, he couldn't ignore the fact that Clara was still holding back. He knew he had to be patient. That trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Every time he saw her, the hope in his chest would flare up, only to be extinguished by the coldness in her eyes. It wasn't intentional, but Clara was still carrying the weight of their past, and it was clear that she wasn't ready to let it go. One evening, while Ethan was in the middle of an important meeting, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but he didn't hesitate to answer it. "Hello," he said, his voice steady but curious. "Mr. Blackwood," the voice on the other end said. It was a woman, and she sounded urgent. "This is Caroline Daniels, Clara Bennett's colleague. We've just received some troubling news. Clara has been in a car accident." Ethan's heart stopped. "What? Is she okay?" "She's stable, but she's at the hospital. I think you should come right away." The world around him seemed to slow down as he tried to process the news. Clara, the woman he had been trying so hard to make things right with, was lying in a hospital bed, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but all he could focus on was getting to her. Ethan arrived at the hospital within minutes, his mind consumed by worry and guilt. Clara had been on her way to an art exhibition when the accident happened. From what he understood, she had been hit by another car while crossing the street. The doctors assured him that she was stable, But the uncertainty of the situation hung heavily in the air. As he stepped into the waiting room, he saw Caroline Daniels sitting there, her face pale and anxious. She stood up as soon as she saw him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice shaky. "Clara's in surgery right now. They're doing everything they can, but ... Ethan felt his chest tighten. "I need to see her." "Where is she?" Caroline hesitated for a moment before nodding toward the hallway. "You can wait outside her room. But the doctors said it'll take a while before they can give us any updates." Ethan nodded and quickly walked down the hallway. His thoughts were a blur. But one thing was clear. He had never felt more powerless in his life. As Ethan stood outside Clara's room, he felt the weight of the past year pressing down on him. He had spent so much time focusing on building his career, on proving himself to his father and the world, that he had almost lost everything that mattered. He had hurt Clara repeatedly. He had ignored her needs, taken her love for granted. And only now, in this moment of crisis, did he realize just how much he needed her. The truth was undeniable. Clara had always been the one constant in his life, the one person who had given him everything, even when he didn't deserve it. And now she was lying in a hospital bed, and all he could do was wait. "I'm sorry," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Clara." Several hours later, the doctors finally gave Ethan the news he had been waiting for. Clara was out of surgery and stable. She had a few broken bones, but nothing life-threatening. Ethan rushed to her side, his heart racing as he entered her hospital room. Clara was awake, though still groggy from the medication. When she saw Ethan standing by the door, she blinked in surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to be there. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Ethan walked over to her bedside, his heart aching at the sight of her. She was pale, bruised, and in pain, but the moment she looked at him, he could see that the spark in her eyes was still there. She was still Clara, the woman he had loved, the woman he was trying so hard to redeem himself for. "I'm here, Clara," Ethan said softly, taking her hand gently in his. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I've made mistakes, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm here. I want to be here for you. You don't have to go through this alone." Clara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, Ethan wondered if she would pull away from him, just like she had done so many times before. But then she squeezed his hand. "I'm scared, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what's happening between us. I don't know if I can trust you again." Ethan's heart sank, but he wasn't going to back down. "Clara, I know I've hurt you, but I'm not giving up. Not on you, not on us. You've been through so much, and I've been blind to it. I want to change, for you, for me, for us." Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Ethan, but right now, I need you to be here. I need you to show me that you're not going to leave when things get tough. I need to know that you're willing to fight for us." Ethan nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I will fight for you, Clara, I promise." The days following Clara's surgery were a blur of visits and recovery. Ethan stayed by her side, helping her with anything she needed, from simple tasks like getting a glass of water to staying up late to keep her company while she slept. It wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about healing the wounds that had been left between them. With each passing day, Clara began to trust Ethan more. Slowly but surely, the walls she had built around her heart started to come down. But she knew it would take time for them to rebuild what they had lost. Ethan, on the other hand, realized that the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. He couldn't expect Clara to forgive him overnight. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Together, they would have to face the consequences of their past. But Ethan was determined to prove to Clara that he was ready to change for her, for their love and for the future they could build together. Clara's recovery from the accident was slow, but she was making progress every day. While she was still healing physically, the emotional wounds from their past were much harder to overcome. Ethan was there every step of the way, but Clara's heart was still cautious. She didn't want to let herself fall back into a relationship that had hurt her so deeply. As Clara started to regain her strength, Ethan continued to prove his commitment. He never pushed her, never tried to rush things. He simply remained by her side, supporting her in ways that were gentle and consistent. But despite his efforts, Clara found herself torn between the man he was now and the man he had been before. Could she trust him again? Could she allow herself to love him fully without the fear of being hurt once more? Ethan knew that time was their biggest challenge. He couldn't erase the past, but he could show Clara that he was willing to wait for her, to be patient, and to never give up on what they had once shared. One afternoon, Clara was at home, resting after a long day of therapy. She was still a little fragile, both physically and emotionally, but the loneliness that crept in was what truly troubled her. She missed her old life, the life before the accident, before the confusion and the heartache. As she sat in her apartment, looking out of the window at the bustling city, she couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? Was it worth reopening a chapter in her life that she had so carefully closed? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Clara wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she saw Ethan standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. "Hi," Ethan said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "I thought you might like these." Clara hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. She had been avoiding him, not because she didn't want to see him, but because she didn't know what to say anymore. She had spent so much time building walls around herself that it felt impossible to break them down. Again, Ethan handed her the flowers and smiled gently. "I just wanted to remind you that I'm here, that you're not alone in this." Clara took the flowers from him, her fingers brushing against his. A small shiver ran through her, and for a moment she felt the old connection, the one they had shared before everything fell apart. But the fear crept back in almost immediately. "Ethan," Clara began, her voice wavering slightly. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. I don't know if I can trust you again." Ethan's face fell, the pain of her words evident in his eyes. But he didn't try to argue. Instead, he nodded and took a deep breath. "I understand, Clara. I've hurt you more than you deserve, and I can't take that back. But I'm not pretending. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've changed. I want to show you that I can be the man you deserve." Clara looked down at the flowers in her hands, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her still felt like she was setting herself up for more heartache. She had spent so much time healing, learning to live without him, and now here he was, asking her to open up again. "I need more time, Ethan," Clara said quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready to jump back into this." Ethan nodded slowly, his voice soft but resolute. "I'll wait for you, Clara. I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, After Ethan left, Clara sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the conversation. She could feel the weight of her emotions pulling at her, the struggle between what she wanted and what she feared. Ethan had changed, that much was clear, but was it enough? Could she trust him again? She thought about the life they could have had, the future they had once dreamed about. And then she thought about the life she had built for herself since the breakup. Clara had grown stronger. She had learned to stand on her own, to chase her own dreams, and to find fulfillment outside of a relationship. But could she go back to Ethan? Could she let herself love him again without the fear of being hurt? The next day, Ethan invited Clara to a small art gallery opening an event that Clara had been planning for months. It was a chance for her to showcase some of her latest work, and Ethan knew how much it meant to her. He wanted to be there for her, to show her that he supported her dreams, no matter what. As they walked into the gallery together, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The last time she had been here with Ethan, everything had been so different. Back then, their future seemed bright and full of promise. Now, it felt uncertain, but as Clara looked around at the people admiring her art, something shifted inside her. She realized how far she had come since the breakup. She had built a life that was her own, one that didn't rely on Ethan or anyone else. And yet, here he was, standing beside her, supporting her, for the first time in a long time. Clara felt something stir inside her, her flicker of hope as the evening went on. Clara found herself enjoying Ethan's company more than she had expected. He wasn't the same man he had been before. He was softer now, more attentive and more present. He didn't talk about work or business. He simply focused on her, on the art, on the moment. As the night came to a close, Ethan turned to her, his eyes sincere. "Clara, I know it's been a long road, but I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've come so far, and I'm honored to be a part of your life again." Clara smiled softly, feeling the warmth of his words seep into her heart. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what the future holds, but maybe we can find a way to move forward together." Ethan's face lit up with hope, but he didn't push. He simply took her hand, a gesture of reassurance. "We'll take it one day at a time." The days following the gallery opening were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Ethan and Clara had grown closer, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. Ethan had proven his commitment with his actions, and Clara had begun to trust him again. But there was still a lingering doubt: was this just a temporary change? Or had Ethan truly transformed into the man she needed him to be? Just when they thought things were finally falling into place, life threw another curve. Ethan's father, William Blackwood, a powerful and influential figure in the business world, called Ethan into his office one morning. The tension in William's voice was unmistakable. "I need you to come to the board meeting tomorrow." "Ethan, we need to discuss the future of the company," William said, his tone demanding, as always. Ethan knew what this was about. His father had been grooming him to take over the family business for years. And now that Ethan was finally starting to take time for himself, to focus on Clara and his personal life, it was clear that his father was not pleased. "I'm not sure I can make it tomorrow. Dad, I have some personal commitments I need to focus on," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't have a choice," William's voice cut through. "The company needs you. You've spent years building this empire, and now it's time to step up. Don't tell me you're going to let a woman distract you from your responsibilities." Ethan felt his frustration bubbling up. His father had always been like this, controlling, demanding, never understanding that Ethan had his own dreams outside of the family business. And now, with Clara back in his life, Ethan realized just how much he had been sacrificing for his father's approval. As the meeting loomed, Ethan found himself caught in a difficult position. He didn't want to disappoint his father, but he also didn't want to lose Clara again. He had made it clear that he was willing to change, to prioritize his relationship with her. But this new challenge felt like a test he wasn't sure he was ready to face. That evening, Clara noticed the change in Ethan. He seemed distant, his mind preoccupied with the meeting that was coming up. She could sense the internal battle he was fighting. "What's going on?" Clara asked gently, her eyes searching his face. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's my father. He's pushing me to take more control of the company. He wants me at the board meeting tomorrow, but I don't know if I can keep living my life the way he wants me to." Clara stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, you have to make a choice. You've been letting your father's expectations dictate your life for so long. I can't be the one who makes that choice for you, but you have to decide what truly matters to you." Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know, but it's not that simple. If I don't take control of the company, my father will never forgive me. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away from everything I've worked for." Clara reached out and took his hand. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan, but you can't keep living in fear of what your father wants. If you want this relationship to work, you need to put yourself first. You need to choose what makes you happy, not just what makes others happy." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just living for someone else. Clara had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. "I'm scared, Clara," he admitted, "but I don't want to lose you. I want to choose us." The next day, Ethan went to the board meeting, but for the first time, he walked in with a different mindset. His decision wasn't easy, and it wasn't without consequences. But he knew that his future with Clara was more important than anything else. As the meeting progressed, Ethan made the bold choice to step down from his position as the heir to Blackwood Enterprises. "I'm done trying to live up to someone else's expectations," Ethan said in front of the board, his voice steady. "I'm stepping away from the company. It's time for me to pursue my own path." The room was stunned into silence, but Ethan stood his ground. His decision wasn't a rejection of his family. It was a declaration of his own independence. He didn't need to follow in his father's footsteps to prove his worth. He needed to live for himself, and for the woman he loved. With the weight of his decision behind him, Ethan returned to Clara. He had chosen her, chosen the life they could build together. There were no more distractions, no more barriers. He was ready to give her everything. "I've made my choice," Ethan told Clara later that evening, his voice filled with certainty. "I want to build a life with you. I don't want to live for anyone else anymore. I want to live for us." Clara's eyes softened as she looked at him. She had been afraid of getting hurt again, but now, seeing the sincerity in Ethan's eyes, she knew that he was ready. She had always believed in his potential, and now he was finally believing in himself. "I want that too, Ethan," Clara whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I've always wanted that. We can make it work." Together, Ethan and Clara's relationship slowly but surely began to blossom again. The hurdles of their past were still there, but they no longer defined their future. They took it one day at a time, focusing on what really mattered each other. Ethan started a new venture, one that was in line with his true passions. It was a risk, but it was his risk to take. Clara supported him every step of the way, helping him build a foundation that was rooted in their love and shared values. They traveled together, spent weekends hiking in the mountains, and enjoyed the small moments of life that they had once taken for granted. Ethan had learned the true meaning of success not in wealth or power, but in the love and happiness that came from being with the right person. Months later, while on a quiet trip to a secluded beach, Ethan took Clara's hand and led her down to the water's edge. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the ocean, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice full of emotion, "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but choosing you has been the best decision I've ever made. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Clara looked up at him, a tear glistening in her eye. "Ethan, I've always believed in us. I've always known that we were meant to be together." With that, Ethan dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring. "Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears flooded Clara's eyes as she looked at him, her heart full of love and joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." The years that followed were filled with love, laughter, and growth. Ethan and Clara built a life together, one that was balanced, fulfilling, and filled with the love they had once thought was lost forever. Ethan learned to prioritize the people he loved over his ambition, and Clara stood by his side, supporting him in all his endeavors. They found happiness not in perfection, but in the understanding that love, trust, and commitment are worth fighting for. Together, they overcame the challenges of their past, creating a future that was theirs to shape. And as they stood together, hand in hand, looking toward the horizon, they knew that no matter what life threw their way, they would face it together.